Hello and welcome to the Yoga Podcast. I am very excited today here to have Anthony Grimm Hall because he is the most unique yoga teacher I have ever encountered. He has 2.5 million visitors to his blog and he has been obsessed with every aspect of the practice of yoga. He changed his life radically in 2007 because, Anthony, what was your profession before 2007?
Before 2007?
Yeah.
I was an instrument repairer.
An instrument repair. And he developed his own practice completely from home by himself most of the time. And now he travels around the world teaching yoga because people invite him to their studio. So he's been in Russia and he's been in Spain and he's likely to be coming to the United States later this year in 2015. He later trained with Srivasa Ramaswamy, who's a student of Krishnamacharya for 35 plus years, and with Manju Joyce, who's the son of Patavi Joyce. He has written 2 books. One is called Vinyasa Yoga Home Practice Book in 2012, and the other one, Krishnamacharya's original Ashtanga Yoga Practice Manual in 2014. Anthony, welcome to the show. I'm so glad to have you here.
Yeah, it's good to see you, Claudia.
So it's 8 p.m. there in Japan where you are. What did you do today?
Today? Not much. I'm getting over a cold, actually. So I've just been taking it easy.
Okay, so no practice?
Yeah, I practice. Yeah, of course.
Oh, that's good to know. I was taken there for a moment. I wasn't sure. So it seems kind of unbelievable to me to be talking to you because we've never talked on the phone, even though our blogs have been parallel. We've been, you started a little bit earlier than me, and we've been on the journey of practicing together. And, your book is in my blog, my book is in your blog, and we've been together in so many levels as we went through. But you have a very specific origin story, and I wanted to talk about that, about how you came into yoga. And you talk about a defining moment that happened to you in 2007 where your house was broken into.
Yeah.
Can you tell us? Yeah.
Okay. It doesn't sound such a big deal anymore. I think when I first 10 times I told it, it probably sort of sounded so dramatic to me, not so much anymore. Basically, we were burgled, robbed, the house was robbed. And I had 7 vintage saxophones stolen. So I was a repairer, an instrument repairer, and I got into it because I wanted to work with vintage saxophones. So I had 7 saxophones stolen, and basically I was angry about having the saxophone stolen, and then I was angry about being angry. So.
And I like how you say that because the anger on top of the anger is like the second arrow. You were really upset.
Yeah, so I used to do a little bit of Zen before, a long time ago. So I thought, okay, I'll just do some meditation, and I think I started with some Vipassana, mindfulness through some podcasts actually. And then sitting was uncomfortable, so I thought, well, maybe I'll just do a little bit of yoga just to make it a bit more comfortable sitting. So I went to the library, and the books were just dreadful covers, And in those days, you had to take the book to the actual librarian and sort of say, I'd like this book, please. So most of the books I really didn't want to take up to a librarian. The least offensive were a couple of books that just happened to be Ashtanga. So they didn't look so bad. So I took those and took them home, and then I just basically started practicing at home on a towel in my underwear, basically. And the practice just started building up from there. Eventually I started getting some tapes, DVDs, such like. But yeah, that was basically it.
You were overweight at the time you mentioned?
Yeah. Quite a bit. I guess I lost, what did I lose? About 20 kilo or something? I guess I was about 94 kilo and I got down to about, I tended to sit around about 77 afterwards. So I lost around about 20 kilo, I guess.
And I looked that up, and in pounds, it translates to something like going from 200 and almost 10 pounds to about 160 pounds. So it's a significant amount of weight that you lost through the exercise.
Yeah, and actually it's probably a bit more dramatic than that, because once, Ashtanga builds quite a bit of muscle as well, because it's quite a powerful practice.
Yeah.
Jump backs and such like. So you're putting on a bit of muscle as well, which is kind of heavy. So if you actually fat, I guess I've lost quite a bit.
And you said that you would use furniture or books as blocks when you couldn't reach for things. You just sort of started transforming things that were in your life into yoga tools without...
Yeah. I didn't have any, there was nothing blocks or straps or anything. So I was just using belts and a couple of piles of books and things like that. It was I remember buying my first mat, actually. That was quite a big deal, going into a shop and buying a yoga mat.
Right.
That's quite a strange thing to do.
Do you still have it?
No, I don't, actually. Well, I don't have anything now, because I just moved back to Japan. I hardly have anything left. I sort of sold it, a bit of everything. But I had it for a long time.
What I found interesting when you were talking about this is that you said that just doing the sun salutations, that you loved sun salutation the first sun salutation, but the second one exhausted you. You were so I get this picture that you were out of shape, feeling unhealthy. You also said you were feeling bloated at the time.
Yeah, pretty much. I wrote about this, how it was. I think later it became disturbing to me how I hadn't realized how the condition I got into, and I think that's quite an interesting thing. Is that I thought I was kind of okay in Japan. I was teaching English. I had some fancy suits, and I thought I looked okay. And it was gradual. You were putting on weight gradually. I must have been the only person to sort of get more unhealthy in Japan. But it was kind of gradual, so I didn't really realize in a way that I put on so much weight, that I was in such bad condition. Really, I'd had a couple of things happen. I had gallbladder removed. I was having kidney problems and different things, but I still didn't really take it that seriously. And I think a lot of people are like that. They think they're okay. They think, I can lose a couple of pounds, but I'm probably not that bad. But actually, I was probably not in good shape at all.
And you were 44 at this time when you got that book in the library.
Yeah, something like that, 43, 44.
And I think that's what I see in a lot of people, sort of like hitting middle age and thinking is the norm to have all those extra pounds and to sort of to be unhealthy, to kind of like taking it for granted that that's just how life is. But I think the way you transform your life is proof that there is another way.
Yeah, you see walking around. We see it all the time now, walking around, because we're seeing people our age, and we see they could probably do with some exercise, or they could do with some eating a little better, or they could do, and it's like they probably figure they'll get around to doing it sometime or other. But it takes time to turn it around. The longer you leave it, the longer it takes, I think. Yeah.
And I think also the very interesting, you actually wrote this originally, I believe, in a response to an article that the New York Times magazine had published, saying that yoga can wreck your body.
Oh, yeah.
And so I think this is the first time that you got prompted to write this story, and you said, hey, New York Times, my body was pretty much wrecked before yoga. And
emotional, didn't I?
What?
I got quite emotional about that.
Yeah, no, and I don't blame you. I think many of us who take yoga kind of like without pushing or trying to make it work, instead of having an idea of how it should look like, it definitely helps. So I think you're a good portrait for it. But what I find more interesting is that you said that in that article that you healed, you had problems with your knees and being bloated, but also the anger seemed to have eased in your life, that you don't feel so angry.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't crazy angry. I mean, I don't think I was that bad, but like anybody, I mean, is it usual to sort of start shouting at your computer and sort of shaking your fist and at the computer screen, or when it doesn't do when you want it to do
right.
something, you know? So I noticed that I just didn't seem to be getting as angry with the computer anymore as I was, which is a small thing, perhaps, but that's one of those things. I think a lot of people probably get angry with their technology.
Yes.
And for me, that was kind of a sign that perhaps I was perhaps less stressed and more chilled out. Perhaps.
And so if you were to, knowing what you know today, if you were to recommend someone who's curious and hears your story, gets inspired, and wants to start yoga, what would be your first pointer suggestion?
Oh, I mean, it depends. I mean, for me, I started with Ashtanga, and Ashtanga worked for me. And perhaps there was something about the... Ashtanga is very good for building discipline, as you know. And that suited me, I think, quite well. And also, I used to practice Aikido before, when I was playing saxophone. I used to go and practice by the river every morning. So that kind of practicing every day seemed to work for me. It was quite physically challenging, and that worked as well. So I think for my temperament, Ashtanga worked quite well. I don't think if I picked up a different book, say, it might not have worked for me. I might have given it up after a few months, perhaps.
Right.
But for somebody of a different temperament, then perhaps a different kind of yoga might work, or it might be something else. I mean, it might not be yoga at all. It might be, I don't know, just going swimming or something every day, or something, just something that you really enjoy doing, because that was part of it. I enjoyed what I was doing. I loved it.
Right.
Great.
Yeah.
And also the other thing was it seemed to be having an effect. Good thing about Ashtanga is that because you're doing the same postures every day, you're starting to see that your postures are feeling a little bit more comfortable, that you're getting a little deeper into the posture, that you can do a few more postures before you start feeling exhausted, perhaps. So that was helpful for me, perhaps. But for somebody else, it might be something of a different kind.
Mm-hmm. You can definitely see the progress in Ashtanga, where you feel, because it's the same postures day in and day out, and you can feel the body sort of changing and adjusting.
But of course, the other side of that is that you can get lost in that. You can kind of get sucked up into the whole next posture thing, next series, and you can just kind of get carried along by that. So that can be problematic as well, perhaps.
I think I was a poster for that. I definitely, when I started, I got very carried away. The day I started, I wanted to to do fourth series. I wanted to do first and second right away. I thought it all was going to happen very quickly, and I got pretty obsessed with the asana to begin with, perhaps out of ignorance in a way.
But also, for me, it was an age thing. I don't know. I mean, you're younger than me.
I'm just slightly younger. I'm 46. So.
Oh, okay. Well, quite elegant, quite. But for me, there was that kind of feeling that I think once I got past the first couple of series or something, you started to think that if you didn't do it now, then you probably wouldn't be able. So if I didn't do third series now, I didn't do fourth series, that maybe I didn't have so much time to do all the fancy stuff. So there was that feeling for quite a while. So I think I was quite drawn up into that, and I was thinking, I just really need to sort of do as many postures as I can while I still can, perhaps. And I think that it took a while to get over that. I think now, I don't really care, to be honest, which postures I really do. They're pretty much all the same.
Right, because it's been, several things have happened, but I wanted to point out, right, you developed your practice pretty quickly, because I remember finding your blog probably at the end of '08, and you were able to, even though you started and you could barely do the two sun salutations, then you were able, you got sort of obsessed with the asanas, and you were dropping back, you were doing leg behind the neck postures, and you pretty much learned the sequences of Ashtanga, I would say promptly, pretty fast. Would you
say? I think one of the things was that because I was doing it at home, it's the thing that somebody practices at home, you don't have anyone telling you that you can and you can't. Actually, I actually did, because when we started blogging, we had people telling us all the time, you're not supposed to do that, you shouldn't.
The police.
Yeah, but I think we had a lot of common sense, didn't we? I mean, I think because also there was no one, if I put both legs behind your head and there's no one to kind of get you out of it, so, you're a little kind of cautious as well. And dropping back as well, you don't want to hurt yourself, and so you are careful. There is common sense there, but also there's no one to sort of say what you can and you can't do and how quickly you can and you can't progress. So I think that perhaps allowed me to just kind of keep going and keep working on postures. And there would be postures that perhaps I didn't have 100%, but it was coming along. It was coming along well enough, and I was happy to then move on to something else and something else, and allow those other earlier postures to keep progressing, if you like. Manji talks this way. So, for example, Marichyasana D, say.
Marichyasana D, by the way, if you can describe it, because some people may not know the postures that are listening.
Okay. Marichyasana D, so you have one foot in half lotus. So the knees bent and the foot is up on your inside of your hip, and then the other leg is bent up, and then you twist over and you reach around the leg that's bent. You reach your arm all the way around, and the other arm goes all around the other side, and then you basically hold on to your. It's
an impossible twist. Like, it literally looks impossible.
Extreme. Yeah, it's quite extreme, and for Manji would say that you shouldn't necessarily be held back on that posture, but you would keep working at it. So you would keep working on some other postures, the ones that come after it, but you would still keep working on, say, Marichyasana D, and that would come along in its own time.
Right.
Interestingly, actually, Krishnamacharya put Marichyasana D in intermediate postures, so it wouldn't have been in primary series anyway.
That's interesting. And I think this is very specific to the Ashtanga system, this sort of like, oh no, you cannot move to the next pose unless you have done this, and you will never do this unless this happens first, and kind of like the guidelines change depending on what teacher you're looking at.
Exactly.
And then
it depends on the teacher.
Sorry?
So it depends on the teacher. So some senior teachers will have you progressing along, continuing to work on the more challenging postures, say, but not necessarily holding you back there.
Yeah.
Other teachers will get you to stay at that posture and just keep working at it until you have it pretty much perfectly. And then they would give you the next posture, the next posture, the next posture. So there's two different approaches.
Yeah.
And both of them have good arguments.
Yeah, I would say. I mean, because I think if I had been stopped at the Marichyasana, it took me a long time. So much, when you laugh, when you finally get a pose and you have like that laughter, sort of like nervous, like, oh my God, it happened.
I think it's on camera.
Yeah. Oh, you have that on camera?
I think so, yeah, when I came up from...
when you came up from the drop back, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful. You have like... you have all these journals of all the postures, and they're amazing. But I was going to say, I think if my teacher had stopped me in Marichyasana when I first started, I would have gotten bored. So I'm glad that didn't happen. But let me ask you, did you ever get injured through yoga?
No, not really. Although, hang on, just recently I had my first yoga injury. I was quite proud. I was practicing with a friend. I was doing a workshop, and I was staying at a friend's place, and we were practicing together in the morning. and she lifted up to do a jump back, lifted up while still in the posture to jump back, which is something I used to do. So I went to do the same thing, and then my mat was a bit slippery, and I just slipped, and I think I dislocated a finger slightly.
Oh.
So, and it's actually still a little bit swollen. I can sort of see it now. It feels fine. I can do everything I want with it. It feels a little bit swollen still.
But I think it's interesting to know it was a slip.
Yeah, it was a little slip. It was, and it took me about 7 years, I think, to get my first.
Right, but it wasn't that you were forcing something. Is that? And I believe that when yoga is well understood, then you would never force. It seems to me this was more an accident than an injury. Like you just slipped. But it's not that you were carelessly sort of trying to force yourself into a deep back bend or anything like that.
Yeah, I think that was a thing as well with home practice. I think we didn't really force ourselves with home practice. I mean, if you go to a shala, you can sometimes have somebody who's taking you a little deeper into a posture. I think the argument is they're trying to show you what's the expression, the full expression of the pose, say, full expression of an asana. Whereas we don't really have that in home practice because there's no one to take us deeper into the posture except ourselves. Oh, we could use a strap, say, and strap can kind of help us go in a little bit more.
Yeah.
But generally, I think we don't overdo it. People think practicing at home, there's no teacher to see you, but I mean, we have a common sense. I think we tend to go a little bit careful.
Yes, and I agree with that. Yes, and
I think.
Yeah, tell me.
No, I think I was. I think I was a little brave in some of the asana, but also I think a lot of common sense as well. So I think there was that kind of little balance of a little bit of bravery to try stuff and a little bit of common sense as well. But also some cowardice in some other postures as well. So at home we can use the wall, for example. There's no one to tell us you can't use the wall. So I used to use the wall for Karandavasana, say, which is a posture where, forearm stand, you go up on your forearms, and then you fold your legs into half lotus, and then fold them all the way down and bring it down so the lotus ends up on your forearms, and then take it all the way back up again. Yeah, I was always terrified going up.
Another impossible posture. I mean, I haven't even gotten there yet. I'm not sure I want to know about it, but...
Yeah, I was terrified of flipping over the other way because it didn't seem to make sense to me. I couldn't picture how my body would be if I flipped over the other way while I was on my forearms. So that kind of scared the heck out of me. So I always used the wall. It wasn't until recently when I actually went to a shala where I knew that I would actually have to do it in the middle of the room that I sort of forced myself to overcome that. So.
Yeah, that's interesting. Now, what would you say is, your blog has changed names as you went along. In the beginning, you were a bit obsessed with the jump backs and the jump throughs, and the blog, I think, reflected that name. Then it was called Krishnamacharya. Then it was called Vinyasa Krama. Now it's called Overcoming Asana.
It's changed again.
Oh, it's changed again?
It's Slow Ashtanga.
It's Slow Ashtanga, right? Based on Krishnamacharya's early teachings.
Right.
So your own definition of yoga has changed many times. What would you say it is today for you?
What, yoga or what my blog is about?
Well, let's talk about both. What is your blog about, and how do you see yoga for you today?
I think with the blog, the changing of the titles was just that people knew what they were getting, really. So people, we got a lot of criticism over the years. We'd get people who would read every post and pretty much give a negative comment on every post. It was like, well, why read it if you're change the channel? Right? And sometimes I would say, well, you call it so and so Ashtanga. So I'm like, oh well, okay, maybe if I change the blog title and so it would be Krishnamacharya's Ashtanga or original Krishnamacharya's Ashtanga. And then a friend turned around and sort of saying, well, original, that's not very nice calling it original. So I was like, okay. So I just kind of end up calling it Slow Ashtanga recently. So I guess the idea is that people get an idea on what it's about, so they can choose then whether they actually want to read it or not.
Right.
What yoga is for me now.
Yeah.
What yoga is for me now. I think the yoga hasn't really changed that much. I think we've been talking about asana. I mean, asana is just asana. I mean, the blog is about asana. I don't think my blog it wasn't much about yoga. It wasn't really that much about the philosophical side. It was mainly just about asana. That's what the blog was about. I come from a philosophy background. I didn't really want to write about the philosophical side so much. I mean, recently it's come out a little bit, but I didn't really want to write about that side.
But you got into the pranayama part, you got into mudras, you got into even some talk of meditation here and there.
Okay. So there was a point when, I started doing advanced series, advanced A, advanced B, and I became a bit of an asana junkie. And so it was always more asana, more asana, more asana. And while I was in that phase, I came across Srivatsa Ramaswamy's book, Complete Book of Vinyasa Yoga. And when you see the book, it's just lots of asana. It's like, wow, great, asana, great. So I took that book home and I started to practice it. And I know you practice some of this as well. And the thing about Ramaswamy's practice is it's pretty slow. And each posture kind of leads into the next posture, but the focus is so much on the breath. And when you practice along with the book, your whole practice slows down completely. And the whole experience of the practice changes. It seems to become much more internal. Even though Ashtanga, I always found Ashtanga to be quite a meditative practice, I found this Vinyasa Krama approach quite profound. So that had quite an effect on me. And then I had that problem. How did then I square that with my Ashtanga practice? Because I've been practicing Ashtanga for a long time.
Right, yeah.
So I tried practicing both. And so I practice, say, Ashtanga in the morning, Vinyasa Krama in the evening, and then the other way around. And then I try and make my Ashtanga more Vinyasa Krama or my Vinyasa Krama more Ashtanga. And for a couple of years, I think, on the blog, that was problematic.
Yeah.
And I think it was only really when I then went back to Krishnamacharya, Pattabhi Joyce's teacher, who we associate Ashtanga with. When I went back to Krishnamacharya's original writing, I saw how his practice was very described as much slower than we were perhaps accustomed to. How he was using kumbhaka, breath retention in the posture. Some postures he was holding longer. It didn't seem as fixed. And so you could start seeing how that early Ashtanga was much closer or not so far away from the Vinyasa Krama I've been practicing as well. And I think once I found that, I was able to bring those two practices together more. So now it's just one practice, but it feels more consistent with each other. And the other aspect about that, both Ramaswamy and Krishnamacharya, was that they were both encouraging an integrated practice. So pranayama, you would do pranayama, you would do meditation. I think Krishnamacharya said, you don't clean the room and then not live in it. And the asana and the pranayama was cleaning the room. So you do your asana, you do your pranayama, and then you do your meditation practice.
Right.
And I think that seemed to get lost a little bit of the way in how many of us practice the Ashtanga. We just didn't get around to doing the pranayama and meditation.
So can you give me, because I'm very curious about your practice today, because, you went back, you found someone who helped you translate the Yoga Asana Galu by Krishnamacharya, which he wrote in the 40s, and you studied the Yoga Makaranda in depth. Every time you find a book, then I have to go buy it and read it, because you really get into it with a passion that I've never seen before. But you've managed, and in your last book you have these, where you have how Krishnamacharya taught the postures that we now do within the Ashtanga sequence. So give me an example of a change where you maybe retain the breath or stay longer in a posture, or how is it different?
Okay, so I think that was part of the thing. I think people tended to think that there was early Krishnamacharya and there was late Krishnamacharya. So the early Krishnamacharya was the Mysore Ashtanga that Pattabhi Joyce then developed into the Ashtanga we have now. So there was that idea. And then the the idea that there was a later Ashtanga that we see in, say, Deskachar, what came to be known as Vini Yoga, Ramaswamy, Mohan, these. But actually, when you go back to the early text, you see that that's not necessarily the case, that there was consistency, perhaps, throughout. So, for me, it was a case of just reading those texts wasn't enough. You actually had to practice it. And the nice thing about the blog was people would send you things. So, somebody had sent me this basically screen, they'd taken a photograph of every page of Krishnamacharya's second book. And it was in the Kannada dialect, and it was in the Mysore Sanskrit library. So I put pictures of that on my blog, and then somebody got in touch and says, oh, well, I'll translate it for you because I'm a Kannada native speaker. So great, so we translated that. And then we saw in that book this original table, which was pretty much exactly the same as the Ashtanga we have now. So, except for, say, the advanced series, which that was quite a bit different. So. But the primary and the intermediate were pretty much the same. So that meant that we knew that Krishnamacharya had the basis of the Ashtanga we have now, the primary and second series. And then we had his earlier book, which gave instructions for all the postures, most of the postures of the primary series. So the idea of the second book was to reorder those postures in the first book into the order of the second book. And that way we were then able to say, okay, here's the Ashtanga we're familiar with, but here are the instructions which are a little bit different. So for example, I don't know, let's pick one. Janushasana, say. Janushasana, one leg is bent and the foot is on the inner thigh, high up on the inner thigh of, say, the left leg. So the right knee is bent and the right foot is on the...
And you're sitting down.
That's right, you're sitting down, yes. And then you're holding on to, say, your toe with both hands, and then you would fold over. Right. So Krishnamacharya would have the same vinyasas we're used to. So he would start from standing, and then he would fold over and then jump back into chaturanga, or plank position, go into upward facing dog, downward facing dog, and then he would jump through, as usual, Ashtanga into the posture. But then as he would fold over, he would introduce kumbhaka, basically, on the end of the exhalation. So kumbhaka is the breath retention. So he would hold the breath in, he would engage the bandhas, and he would hold it for 3-5 seconds, say, and then he would relax the bandhas to an extent, and then come back up again, inhaling, giving him some space to breathe, and then he would then fold back in on the exhalation and then do another kumbhaka. So he would have a kumbhaka at the end of every exhalation in that posture. In another posture where the head is up, he would have a kumbhaka, say, after every inhalation. So that's something that's quite different about Krishnamacharya's instruction, which can get carried on into.
And do you find that it has a different effect on you practicing this way as opposed to the Ashtanga where you would get in Janushasana, just breathe 5 times, get out, go to the other side? So in this sort of stopping and retaining the breath, and what happens to you when you practice it that way?
It has a very meditative effect. I mean, Ashtanga generally always felt to be meditative anyway because you're doing the same postures and the movements are familiar and there's the focus on the breath. So it's always been a meditative practice. But this seems even more so. I mean, it slows it down. The inhalations and exhalations are slower, perhaps, than we become accustomed to in current Ashtanga.
Right.
And the kumbhaka as well. There's this moment when nothing happens. There's just this pause. Everything just stops. Everything stops. And that happens at the end of every exhalation or the end of every inhalation.
And when you say everything stops, would you say the mind stops too, in a way? Or
it does seem to, yeah. I mean, we talk about sometimes like monkey mind and how the mind kind of goes all over the place. When you try, if you try to meditate for any length of time, all of a sudden thoughts will keep coming up and jumping about and such like. But I don't find that happening in the kumbhaka so much. I don't know if anyone else experienced on this. perhaps because it's only a few seconds.
Right.
But there is that stillness that kind of seems to come into the practice, which is quite interesting.
Yeah, that's very nice. And that's definitely something that has happened to me as I learned from you about these retentions in certain poses, in trying them a little bit, not a lot, but it has had the effect of slowing the practice so much that I've had to cut posture sometimes, because otherwise I will be practicing for I don't know how long, 5 hours. It's just, I can't do it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's part of the problem is, I think if you have a fixed sequence, then that becomes problematic because, well, with Ashtanga, there's a lot of postures in the Ashtanga series, and if you want to get it all practiced within 90 minutes, 2 hours, and you have to crack on a little. So you have to compromise. So and what gets compromised usually is the breath.
Right.
You make it a bit shorter. Whereas if you want to make the breath longer and slower, if you want to introduce kumbhaka, then you have to compromise elsewhere, and that becomes then the posture. So for me, I'm quite happy to do half a series one day, and then do the second half of the series another day. So sometimes even a third of the series.
But just take it slow.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, although this week I've been... it's cold here. It's kind of cold, and I've been running around doing workshops for the last few weeks, and I felt I'd lost a degree of flexibility. So last few days, I've gone back to pretty much full Ashtanga series. But I've been changing the tempo quite a bit. So some postures I'll only stay, because my breath is quite long, so some postures I'll only stay for 2 breaths, which is pretty much the same length of time as most people who practice Ashtanga would stay in a posture, but my breath is longer and slower, say. So 2 breaths is enough there. Other postures, I'll treat it more as a mudra and stay longer. So I'll do most of the series, but then I'll change that tempo quite a bit. So yeah, some postures I'll stay longer, some postures I'll stay less amount of time. And I'll do less vinyasas as well, perhaps. So I won't necessarily jump back after every posture, or in between every side of the posture.
When you say I'll make the posture a bit more of a mudra, what do you mean?
Okay. So, yeah, it seems that there's something strange about Krishnamacharya's instructions in his first book. In his first book, which he wrote in Mysore in 1934, same time he was teaching Patavi Joyce. And it's almost as if he's treating a posture as a mudra. So in a mudra, bandhas are engaged. Usually the exhalation could be longer, maybe twice as long. So where usually in Ashtanga we have equal samavriti, we have the same length inhalation as exhalation. In a mudra, the exhalation could be twice as long, say. And there would be usually, say, a kumbhaka in a mudra. Bandhas would all be engaged. And there'd be a strong focal point, a meditative focal point, concentration point anyway. And when you look at the asana instruction in Krishnamacharya, it seems like almost every posture he seems to be treating them almost as mudras. So in Bhadrasana, say, Bhadrasana, one knee is the second series posture, one knee is bent back, the other leg is in half lotus, the other foot's in half lotus. And you reach round and hold on to that foot in half lotus with the same arm as the foot in half lotus, and then the other hand will go under the knee.
I'll put pictures of
twist.
it.
Yeah, okay. It's a deep twist. You normally look over, say, the right shoulder if that's where the twist is.
Right.
But Krishnamacharya would have you look the other way, so you would be looking over towards the front, which seems to allow more space in the chest and allow you to breathe more easily. And then in that posture, with the head forward, you can then engage a Jalandhara Bandha, the chin can come down. So you're able to do a kumbhaka, and he'll tell you to stay for 12 breaths in this posture. He'll suggest 12 breaths. So it seems to me that he's pretty much describing a mudra. So the asana seems to become more mudras for him.
I see. So it seems to me that that practicing Krishnamacharya sort of way of Ashtanga yoga would give a completely different effect than practicing the Patavi Joyce Ashtanga yoga, especially as is practiced today, jump in, jump out, 1.5 hours, all of the asanas. And I think we're seeing practitioners who've been doing it now for 30, 35 years, and how they are changing too. You pointed to an article to me yesterday from Gregor Maeli where his view of Ashtanga yoga has changed. And I think many of us, or at least for me, as I grow older, I also notice that, frankly, I'm not sure I can keep up with that rhythm. And second, I find that this approach of going slower, getting more into the posture, tends to have that effect of finding peace, which is more like what I think I want out of yoga. Has your view in Ashtanga changed that way, or you use it on different days? You still go for the running, and on other days you go for the slow?
No, I tend to practice pretty much the same thing all the time now. For a long time, I keep my Friday practice sort of sacred, straight primary. It used to be, for years that would stay the same. No matter what else I was doing, there was that Friday practice there. But that's changed a little bit now as well. But then just recently, just a couple of days ago, I read some conference notes on from Sharat Joyce in Mysore, and he was saying that eventually everyone comes back to primary anyway. He was saying basically don't dismiss primary series. Primary series is great. Eventually you're going to come back to it. So whether through injury, whether through old age, or whether for some other reason, eventually you're going to come back to those basic postures anyway. And on another thing with Sharat, although often it seems that modern practitioners of Ashtanga seem to practice very, very quickly. When you see Sharat practice, he never seems rushed to me.
He does.
I've seen his DVD, and he just seems very relaxed throughout the whole practice. And he'll do it in 60 minutes, but he doesn't look rushed. It's very strange.
Yeah. Yeah, he's very light, and he's like a feather sort of floating through.
Yeah.
Nothing.
And my jump back chain. I remember I used to do this really dramatic jump back where I kind of pretty much went into sort of half handstand and then kind of floated down and through. And then I saw Sharat's, I think he demonstrated a little jump through once in Mysore, and it was the most delicate little thing, almost a little step, almost a little hop. And there was just no energy at all. It was so efficient. It was just so efficient. And so I just completely changed my jump through from that. So now I do this kind of little Sharat sort of hop through. And my whole practice has that aspect now. I try and conserve energy more and more. Mm. And less flourishes. But then maybe that's the point. Maybe eventually we get past that body aspect, we get, because for a while it's cool, right? Ashtanga can be pretty cool, and we can get lost in that a little bit, we can get lost in all the fancy postures, but after a while, we start seeing through that. It's just fancy postures.
Right. And
then we...
Yeah?
No, and then we just seem to kind of look for something else in the practice, because by then we're addicted to practice anyway, so we're just going to keep doing it, right? So we've got to find something else within the practice.
Yeah, and what is that something else you're finding? Are you finding that through pranayama, through meditation?
Yeah, and I think I was talking about this with friend Nick, actually, today, this is the problem, I think, when you put pranayama. So there's the argument that you shouldn't. It used to be supposedly that you would do pranayama after, quite early on, say, and then it seemed to come into practice that you would only do pranayama after you achieve second series. Of course, a lot of people never achieve second series. Mm. Whereas, with Ramaswamy, we would do pranayama pretty early, actually. And when you practice pranayama, that changes your view of your asana practice straight away. So once you practice pranayama and you're practicing meditation, then you can't help but start bringing that into your practice, or perhaps noticing that aspect of the practice more. So
yeah, that is so true. That is absolutely true. It changes the quality because the focus is different. I think you're not. The body serves the purpose of the quietness and the silence, I suppose, and that peace that comes with the silence, rather than maybe just stretching more or doing more fancy postures. It changes.
Yeah.
I like what you said. You have a 33-part post on developing a practice, and on part 16 you say anyone who practices 6 days a week earns the right to determine for themselves what the hell this practice is about. And
is that what you like, choose yourself yogi?
Yeah. That's what I mean by choose yourself yogi. Yes, but also I mean that you really didn't fear the police that came after you, and they came after me too. Oh, you shouldn't be writing this, you shouldn't be doing that, or that's not. And you took the positive parts of that. I really welcome comments about how to improve the postures, and so you kind of use the whole cyber shala in a way. But I like this part because I think eventually when you get in it, and you're like almost 9-10 years into it now, it does become your practice. It does become something very personal, and you find what works for you. And I think that's the beauty of it.
Yeah, there is a point, I think, when, if you've been turning up your mat every day for a period, I don't know what that period would be. I mean, you turn up at the mat every day for a month, that's something.
Yeah.
In fact, I mean, you get a week. Get a whole week, turn up every day in the morning and do your practice, even if it's a really short practice, for a week. And that's the thing. And then you do it for a month. And then if you get a year of just turning up all the time, then I think you start earning the right to basically make sense of your own practice. And I think once you've done that for a couple of years, and I think somebody sort of telling you what is the right or wrong practice for you, that just becomes a bit nonsensical, really. Because, there's always supposed to be a home practice, I think. In the end, you're supposed to go up to a little hut somewhere and sweep it clean and then do your practice.
Right. Yeah. And do you, I come across a lot, I'm teaching a little as well myself, and I come across this, how do you stay motivated to return? Say that person, say they did a week of practice, but then suddenly they feel like they don't want to do it. What do you answer to that?
I don't know how people do it with other practices. I know Ashtanga works quite well on motivation. That's one of its strengths. I mean, it has problems, it has some dangers, perhaps, but it also has that it seems to be built almost in a way that encourages you to keep coming back.
Because of the 6 times a week.
Yeah, because you get into a habit. So it's very good at building a routine. And routine is the mother of discipline, right? So you just have to turn up. So even if you're not going to do your whole practice, even if you just get changed and just stand at the top of your mat, that's a start. Once you're there, then say, okay, you're just going to do a couple of sun salutations. Right? And even if you only do, say, 5 sun salutations, and then roll out your mat and then leave, then that's still quite something. And you're still building that routine of actually getting onto your mat in the morning. And usually, how many times, I'm sure you're the same as me, how many times you think, like, okay, I'll just get on there and just do a few sun salutations.
Right. But
I always ended up doing my whole practice.
That happens. That takes you by surprise when it happens, doesn't it? You're like, how did I end up doing the whole thing? Yeah,
you're sick. Like this morning, I was just getting over this cold, and you think, okay, I'll just maybe do a little bit of standing, a couple of seated postures, and then you end up doing the whole bloody thing.
Right. So
because they link into each other as well. That's the beauty of, say, a relatively fixed sequence, is that you get used to one posture following the other posture. It feels really strange to stop somewhere.
It does.
I mean, so I'll just do the next one, and then you're halfway through, and it's like, well, the next few are easy anyway, so I might as well just do those.
So, Anthony, I've seen a photograph of you teaching, and I've seen that you have there's a slide behind you, and there's Krishnamacharya sitting down, and I was curious, do you talk about the history of Krishnamacharya in your courses? Because that looked very interesting to me.
The slides are I basically ripped them off from the Transformations exhibition in New York. I took a load of screenshots of some of the pictures from that, and I just tried to use it to just try and get an idea of to put Krishnamacharya in context, really. And so I have this slideshow of these pictures of old rishis, old yogic figures and heroes and yogic superheroes, if you like. Because a lot of those old sages, there are all these stories behind them.
Right.
And those stories were, those are the superheroes I figure that Krishnamacharya grew up with. So that's what I do with the pictures, basically. So I just try and put Krishnamacharya in context a little bit. And then I talk about his, the myth and the legend of Krishnamacharya, and then afterwards we just basically kind of question that. We question some of those aspects of the myths and of the legend and see how much of it how we want to respond basically to some of the stories. Yeah, I'm just trying to get more of an idea of the person who actually wrote those books and developed that practice.
That's very interesting. I can't wait to take your workshop. I would really like it. I'm pretty sure. And let me ask you, what do you do when you have, has it happened to you to get people come to you who are complete beginners, or people who have, say they're a little out of shape, or and how do you accommodate for that?
Not really, because I don't really teach. I don't think I teach. I mean, I never really wanted to teach. I wasn't planning on teaching at all.
But it's happening.
I know, but then when I went to Ramaswamy's, it was a teacher training, but I don't think anyone was there for the teacher training. We just wanted to spend 5 weeks with Ramaswamy. But there was that feeling that afterwards you probably should teach, that you're almost obliged. And so it was a case, if somebody asks me, then I'll do it. But I didn't particularly want to become a yoga teacher necessarily.
Right.
So a couple of times I've had a few people who got in touch, but they're usually people who are either teachers themselves or have been practicing a while and wanted to maybe find out some more about Vinyasa Krama or some Krishnamacharya's work, if you like. Right. So not so many beginners. And again, on the workshops, it's usually Ashtangas who want to know a little bit more about the history, or it's about people who are curious about Vinyasa Krama and want to know a bit more about that. So
yeah. I
mean, I had people on the blog, obviously. The blog people get in touch all the time saying they're just starting a practice. And, we get a lot of questions there, perhaps. But that's perhaps a bit different.
Right. So let me ask you, I'm going to ask you a kind of a deep type of question that I asked, but you always have such a different view that it always surprises me. So let's see. So here's the thing. What would you say is one thing within the yoga world, in all of these years of practice and studying, what is one thing that took you a very long time to understand?
Well, everything. I mean, everything really, isn't it? I mean, doesn't everything, we just change our view on it all the time. We're constantly, I mean, that's yoga is radical inquiry. That's what it's about. We're supposed to be questioning everything. I mean, really, really everything. Right. Everything we think we see, experience, who we think is experiencing the experience. It's radical inquiry. So I think we're constantly looking at the practice again, looking what we think yoga is and what it means to us, and that's changing a lot. It's embarrassing sometimes looking back at some of the old posts. Sometimes I come across an old post that developing a yoga practice. That's sometimes I keep thinking about rewriting those, and I look at them and it's just like, oh my God, I can't believe I wrote that. And there's all these things like where I'm sort of, I'll be kind of saying, banders, this is nonsense, you know, or pretty much something. And I'll pretty much dismiss every aspect of yoga that I've ended up 2 years, 4 years later writing posts on.
So it's a
what was the question again?
Right. For you, it's a constant understanding and coming back and revisiting. It's kind of like it's a work in progress what's taking you
yes,
so long.
Because you have to do that, because and that's part of the problem, because this practice becomes very personal, especially if you practice every day.
Yes.
It becomes very, very personal, and then you get an idea of what it's about, what it means to you. And people can get quite defensive about that.
Oh yeah.
And they're almost constantly wanting to reinforce that, if you like. But actually, you need to question that. You need to keep questioning it all the time. And I think in my own practice, I can see myself constantly going back and questioning again stuff that I've kind of come up with. That's the nice thing about the blog, because you can see it there and wince when you read it and you think, well, do I still think that? And often I'll write a post and it will kind of come out, and I'll actually post it because I want to think about whether I actually agree with what I've written a few days later. You know, and sometimes I'm almost annoyed that people don't challenge me on some of these things, because
really,
I write something and I know how I'd respond. I know what I'd question. I wrote one recently on Surya Namaskara as being the origin of the...
I saw that. That was very interesting.
Yeah, I like that post, but as soon as I finish writing it, I have so many questions about it. Do I really think that? Or where's examples of this? You know, where's the evidence for this?
You were saying, where did Krishnamacharya get the idea for the jumping back and jumping through in between each pose? You were trying to sort of figure out, where did that come from? Was that Pattabhi Jois? Was that Krishnamacharya? Was his teacher? And
because there's the idea that I guess this came from like Mark Singleton and Yoga Body and such like. Whereas it seems that if you start with the asana, and then you try and figure out, well, where did the vinyasa come from? So then you're adding on postures, if you like, around it, and you think, well, where did he get those postures from? And you look around, you see, well, there's these wrestling examples, there's this gymnastics movement going on, there are all these things. So you bring those things in, right. And that's your way of then explaining it. And if you're starting from an idea of a dynamic practice, a very athletic Ashtanga practice, then you're looking for those aspects to explain that practice, right? Yep. But for me, I was practicing a much slower Ashtanga. I was looking at Krishnamacharya's early work, and I was looking at the sun salutation with mantras, where you would do one of the first postures of a sun salutation, and then the breath would be held, and then a kumbhaka, and then you would chant mentally a mantra, and then you would fold into the next stage of the sun salutation, and there would be another mantra on a kumbhaka, and so on all through the sun salutation. And then in the middle you'd prostrate to the sun, if you like, and then you'd move back through the sun salutation back to standing. So it seemed to me that everything was there, and all you needed to do was just take that prostration out and put any of the asana in there. Put Paschimottanasana in there, put Janushasana, put Marichyasana in the middle. And everything else is the same. Right. And the kumbhaka's there already, and all those different aspects. It's a very meditative practice. The breathing is there. Everything becomes explained in a more elegant way, it seems to me. So depending on where you're coming from, if you're coming from a modern idea of practice being very dynamic, and then trying to explain a practice from a long time ago, or if you're starting from how that practice was a long time ago, where it was much calmer, and then trying to explain it from there, that seems to make a big difference.
Yeah, and I didn't challenge that post at all, because it actually left me, like, I had a little bit of an aha moment. This could be, he's right, is what I thought. All the elements of the sun salutations with the postures in the middle, it kind of makes complete sense to me.
Yeah. I mean, there's still questioning. I mean, as a theory, you still need to tidy it up, and you still need more examples to kind of nail it down. But it's a nice, whether it doesn't really explain whether Krishnamacharya developed that himself, whether his teacher developed it, or whether it was something that went back a long way. Perhaps you don't really know.
Right.
But either way, it explains many aspects of a slower practice, of the slower Ashtanga.
Yeah, and it's fascinating to follow you because I find you to be kind of like the gossip magazine of the 1940s yoga. You're always,
Gossip.
yeah, you're looking for all the details. Where did this come from? Was it Krishnamacharya? Was it his teacher? And it's fascinating how you present it and how you're constantly exploring it. And also not just gossip, but fact-checking with history and reading books and doing research. It's fascinating. I highly recommend your blog to anyone. It's a rabbit hole. You'll go down and you can get trapped in there for hours.
Yeah, I keep trying to stop it. I keep trying to I keep meaning, like this post, what's the post I wrote? I think the last post, I forgot what that was. And I was thinking, well, that would be a good last post. And the Surya Namaskara post, I thought, yeah, that would be a good last post. And the next one, I thought, yeah, that would be a good last post. That would be a good one to end on. And every time I think that, I end up coming up with another 10 posts.
I think I heard you saying that a couple of years ago too.
Loads of times.
Yeah, loads of times.
Every time I think about it, I end up coming up with more things.
Yeah. So, Anthony, do you have any more books coming out? Are you working on anything that you may be publishing soon, or?
No, not really. I keep coming up with ideas of things. I keep thinking, okay, I want to do something on this. I want to do something on that.
Okay, so it could be happening. And if people want to hear about your upcoming workshops, you may have one coming in the United States, I hear?
Yeah, there was talk about it. I was asked if I'd do one. I think sometime last year, I was asked if I'd do one next year. So it was quite a long way ahead. So it was in theory. So I haven't heard any more about whether anyone still wants me. The person still wants me to do it. And, if they want me to do it, I guess I'll do it.
I hope so. I certainly hope so.
I enjoy it. I enjoy them.
Yeah.
I mean, the nice thing now is almost that I have no more workshops sort of in the diary. There's nothing. It's kind of nice. It's like, okay, I can just worry about my own practice now. Because it's disruptive doing workshops. But then again, when you do them, it's just so rewarding. And I enjoy doing them. But, yeah.
I agree with that. For me, I just gave recently a workshop and it was exhausting. But coming back to the mat, it was... I couldn't believe how much I got out of the workshop myself, even though I was a facilitator or teacher of kinds. It's interesting
because you're explaining things. All these things are kind of coming out, and then you're going, yeah, and then your own practice, you want to kind of come back to that. Once somebody was asking what the kumbhaka was about, what was the kumbhaka for Krishnamacharya saying, and it was like, okay. And I explained my understanding of what it was, and I don't think I said it out loud before. And it was like, so then in my own practice, that was quite powerful when I started practicing afterwards. And it was like, that's interesting.
Right.
Yeah, so it's rewarding. I enjoy doing them. Yeah.
And I hope I see you soon. Here, your blog, can you tell us what your blog is for people to find you?
Oh, I don't know. What is it now? Usually the nickname I was using was Grimly. So usually you just type in Grimly and pretty much anything to do with Ashtanga and it will come up. At the moment it's called...
Grimly 2007,
blogspot.co.uk, yeah.
Oh, the .co.uk. Oh, I go to .com and it takes me there too.
Yeah, it does. Basically, you just write Grimly Ashtanga, Grimly Krishnamacharya, Grimly anything.
It's just Grimly. I think just Grimly, that's it. And so perhaps we can close on that note. What is the Grimly thing about?
Years ago, I spent a bunch of years in the 80s traveling. And I had a big beard, a lot of hair. And I think we were hitchhiking. I think we hadn't had a bath for 2 weeks until we hit the sea. And I was looking pretty grim. And then we got some work building a house in Switzerland. And my friend spoke better French than I did. So he introduced me. He started calling me Grimly. And he introduced me as that. And then that kind of stuck. Because everywhere I go and get a job, there was somebody else with another Anthony who was working there. So I said, well, people call me Grimly, you can use that. So that's where it came from.
That's funny. Grimly, Anthony, thank you very much for joining me today. I really appreciate this. I'm sure everyone else will too. And you can also find Grimly on Twitter. He is Grimly2007, as well as in his blog. And we hope to have you in the US soon.
Yeah, pleasure, Claudia. Good to see you.
Okay, bye-bye.
All right, bye.